Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is to give a classroom demo of the Classroom Presenter system. That I'm going to run this as a very informal demo, so please go ahead and ask questions. That when I use this technology in the classroom, the way I found to start class is to get everybody to use the system. So very quickly, I would like you all to draw a picture of yourself and send it in to me. And when you've completed the drawing, go ahead and press this button, which will send your slides into me. That I got some very, very nice pre-submissions from class. So if you've already submitted, there's no reason to improve on your masterpiece. But similarly, go ahead and so one of the things I find very interesting about doing this in class is discovering people's self-impression of that there's probably a nice psychology dissertation that could come from this. And I've actually been very, very impressed at the artistic skills of some of the students in my class that obviously honed from in here as well. And
actually, if you ask them to draw the instructor's picture, it gets even better.
It gets better. So just showing what the system is, that the principle has been to develop a distributed system for classroom use. And one thing I want to emphasize from the beginning is that this is a very, very simple system. That it's based on being able to send images back and forth and send ink back and forth. So what's happening is I've asked you to draw pictures, and then when you hit the submit button, these are sent back to me. And these then appear on my tablet in a secondary film strip. So I have an opportunity to see all the information that's coming into me. And then when I select one of these images, it's then displayed on the public display. So the system is based on having 3 different views: an instructor view, which I've got, which has various controls and the slides. Your view, which you can view the slides. That there is a little chain on the upper left, which would allow you to navigate slides independently or have the slides linked to me. That one thing I found fascinating is the passion that features such as this cause. That I've had people argue that it's absolutely evil to insist that the instructor's slides, the student be linked to the instructor's slide. And I've had people argue equally passionately on the other side. So people, stunning how strong feelings. So in the application, we do support both modes. So if I decided to, I could force your slides to be linked to mine. So there are scenarios where you do want instructor slides to be hidden. So this is a type of thing that we've been considering in the application. So in terms of the educational theory that goes behind this type of work, that there's been a tremendous amount of work on active learning and thinking about what goes on in the classroom. And there's this basic fact that if you plot attention versus time, you get, well, what do you think you get? So starting, and so please, on your tablet, draw the curve that you expect, attention versus time. And just to clarify, here I am asking for time in minutes. I got the question, is that minutes or seconds? But you have fairly coarse granularity. What happens to attention versus time? And there have been studies based on monitoring heart rate, study based on submitting, kind of diary studies as to.
We have to submit what we're doing to you?
Yes, please submit them when you're.
With the mail button?
Yes.
What we're doing without our submitting?
No, our model has been you own the ink until you submit it. And I've liked that particular model of student control until an explicit action for sending. Of course, people do suggest other models, and there are models where it'd be nice to be able to measure progress and doing hints that in the classroom, I actually do that by just walking around and looking and seeing what people are doing. So,
Question. When you link it by force, does it mean that I can navigate through other things over here?
yes, I can force it so you cannot navigate. But so here's a general curve that is somewhat pessimistic about what happens during class. Let's see. Artificial stimulants of, I guess, starting with an initial, not very interesting. So this curve is fairly realistic, that often the studies show that there is a plateau of interest for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then there's kind of a continental shift. But there definitely seems to be a loss of attention somewhere in this period, and often observed that there is a light at the end of the tunnel feeling towards that. College students, medical students, for some reasons, have been the ones that most of the experiments are done on. Maybe the human subjects issues are handled better in med schools. So looking at curves like this, the motivation for active learning in general is the idea that if we do introduce activities into the class at fairly regular intervals, the hope that by giving students things to do, we re-engage interest and achieve an attention, and by changing lecture from just strictly monotonous delivery to integrating activities, can increase the engagement and interest level. So in this talk, what I'm going to do is to just give a set of examples of the types of things that we're doing in class. So the model of instruction it's a slide-based lecture where I am embedding activities inside the lecture. And this embedding of activities has changed the way I think of doing a lecture, since I do design a lecture around thinking about learning goals, what activities will support them, and then put in content. But having this all done in the context of a slide deck provides a structuring mechanism and also a distribution mechanism. So I'll begin by just stepping through the type of things that I do in class. So I assume that all of you attended the session yesterday morning. So just very quickly, what's the most interesting thing that you remember 24 hours after the session? And this is going to be interesting because I'm going to be able to compare it with what people remembered immediately after the session. So this was the dialogue between Bill Gates, Maria Klawe, and Rick Rashid. So let's see. Shrinking pipeline was one of the themes from the talk. Must have been a lawyer joke or two embedded in it. Increasing interest level.
How do I know that I've sent it?
You don't.
Okay, let's say
That if I display it, you do know. So there is a tiny bit of feedback that you receive. And the real question is, how would you know if I actually received it?
Do you get multiple copies by the same device?
Yes. So I do get repeated copies, and in class, there will be times where students want to revise answers. So I do see the later answers.
a lot of us put that one up there. Yes, a lot of us have that.
So this type of thing is that being able to do this is a way to get a lot of voices expressed in class and to simultaneously collect information. I found it very powerful in classes such as software engineering to ask a fairly basic question of why do software projects fail, and get a whole set of different answers. And I've actually found it very compelling just to be able to quickly step through students' answers and display it in the students' own handwriting, which did have a kind of personalizing style of displaying what students were thinking. Another assessment that's often very interesting to do is that if you do have assigned reading or something, you have a forcing function to get people to find out, have people done the reading. So some people might have been reading the most recent bestseller of Huh? Although not mentioned by name, the other minister is in fact the prime minister. Credit?
Other than what? Other than what?
So the Minister of Magic is the minister. So the Prime Minister was the other minister. How many thinks Cornelius Fudge is a Minister of Magic? Not anymore. I say it's a hard question or not very attentive. I'm disappointed no one's done the reading carefully.
Limit on the tool.
Why is that sale at the airport?
Mm-hmm. Lack of concept being taught here.
So these first two examples were a type of assessments that I would do in class to get quick answers from everybody and basically soliciting individual opinions. The one thing that's a very, very rich way of using this technology in the class is to use it collaboratively. That often when we use tablets in the class, we don't have enough to give tablets to everybody. So just kind of making a virtue out of necessity, we'll have 2 or 3 students per tablet. And one technique is to give more involved problems and have people work them in groups. So for this type of problem, I really encourage you to work with the person around, with people around you to figure out the answer. So the problem is that I'm giving you 3 coins. One coin has 2 heads. So I'm giving you 3 coins. One coin has 2 heads, a second coin has a head and a tail, and a third coin has 2 tails. And so these coins are all in a bag. And I ask you to pick a coin at random from the bag. And you flip the coin in the air, and I tell you that coin has landed heads. So you've picked a coin, flipped it in the air, and it lands heads. My question, what is the probability that the underside is a head? So work with your neighbors, and when you've got an answer, please submit it. Mm-hmm. 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 There are 3 coins in the bag. You've picked one of them, flipped it in the air, and it's landed heads. And I want to know what's underneath. Or what's the probability that's a head? Oh. I'll get it. Okay, everybody's back to where they should be, right? Sorry. Mm-hmm. And so what's very interesting about this type of problem and doing it in class is that it often can generate a lot of discussion. So the best time that I...
So I have a question.
Yes. Yes.
This is, the flow is being really disrupted here. And so how does the trade-off between more participation and the flow just being so disrupted and being such a slow lecture?
So certainly, so I'll take it slow in one sense. So I cover less when I have interactivity. I think I'm covering less in greater depth. And so I guess my approach is I probably wouldn't do this style of lecture every day. So I do see a trade-off in coverage. But there's also the possibility that by having greater depth, you might force more off onto the students.
But the classic way to do these things is to have a nice lecture that people can pay attention to and don't get bored by other people being slow in getting the answer. And having homeworks where they think asynchronously without slowing the people down. And doing it in depth. So, to do depth in the classroom is almost an oxymoron.
So I guess I disagree with that on a lot of grounds of just opportunity to take advantage of the information that I'm receiving from people in class allows me to do things differently. And also getting...
Ask them to do a theorem in class.
I wouldn't ask them to do a deep theorem in class.
Well, actually, I'm struggling on the other end, actually. I teach a course on C++. Not a single line of code shown to me. I build every line of code from scratch. It's a semester-long course, and of course, the first reaction is, my gosh, I'm going to write all the code in class. It's going to take way too long. Actually, it doesn't. The entire semester is built by writing every line of code in class. I post it on the web right after the class to them. The students love it. And the best part of it is they sometimes build algorithms in the class. And you could see their faces like they didn't just learn, they understood what's going on. It's really a great experience. But what I'm struggling with is, I need to be spending 90% of my time on the compiler. So how can I use this tool to run C++ compiler and write code? Do you have any suggestions on that?
So when instructors want to do that, generally what they will do is use this tool and then Alt-Tab to a compiler.
And I need to rely on the keyboard at that point?
Yes.
Not to be too much of a teacher's pet here, but also he's illustrating on every slide, one of the possible interaction techniques with the students. I mean, what he said earlier was he would do this every 10 or 15 minutes now. So at University of Oregon, the teaching effectiveness program is loved by some instructors and disparaged by others, but they strongly advocate for very forward-looking and progressive teaching techniques which do interrupt the lecture every 10 minutes or so with some kind of an activity, be it paper-based or other.
I didn't mean just to be a disruptor, which I normally take a role of. But I'm seriously thinking about whether I would teach you this or not. And I go through great pains in preparing my class so that they don't get a single moment to let their mind go through the hole. Fixing the hole,
Yeah.
my mind wanders through the Beatles song. And I'm always afraid that they've got other interesting things in their mind. And this is making it easier for somebody to let their mind wander. And so I'm trying not to ever be slow, or so that they would lose it. So I find this lecture very slow, what you're doing right now, and I wonder whether this would be in the real situation too. And I know we all want to say that computer persons and technology makes a difference. I happen to not believe that. Okay. So because based on these examples.
So I kind of agree with you. I think that you give them half a chance, they will start thinking about something else. I think if you're not using this, they're going to think about their email and everything else. If you give them this,
nice lecture.
they've got something to think about and talk about with each other.
The moment you repeat something, the moment your logic fails, that's when they wander. When the talk is really good, your mind doesn't wander.
But what if
There's nobody
you
who can
brush
talk that whole range.
what if you brush half the class in your logic?
Yeah.
So that is where you have to be a good teacher. That's where you have to prepare the material well and maybe use this as an experimentation thing.
No, but we are...
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
So in one sense, this is incredibly successful. So one of my goals in using technology in the classroom is to enhance interaction, including verbal interaction. So when I'm using this technology, I actually consider it a real plus. In my experience is there's more spoken interaction in classes where I'm introducing activities, having mechanisms for people to contribute, than in my more traditional, carefully prepared speech-based lectures. So just back to this particular problem, that this problem is one where the obvious answer is 1/2, but not the correct answer. And so the way to see the answer is 2/3 is that the sampling is that a head is appearing. So it actually means I've selected at random one of these 3 configurations. And so with probability 1/3, I've got this head which is a matching head, probability 1/3 this head with a matching head, and 1/3 that has a tail, so giving a 2/3 probability.
So then as a student I could write out when I put 1/2 wrong why?
Yes, and actually when I've used this in some demos, some of the most interesting submissions I've got have been ones where I could see students work through the process in ink. So not just having the 2/3, but having some type of picture where I could reconstruct their thought process. And so there it was the richness of ink showing the thought process that allowed me to see how they had done and talk about.
Are the student submissions anonymous?
So currently it displays the machine that it came from. So it's kind of semi-anonymous. And
The thought of having a provision that it would presumably be controllable by the speaker, but to allow students to submit anonymously if they want to.
Yes, I've certainly thought about the different options and have settled on the one of showing the machine name, not the student name. The catch is, regardless of what I do, there's no way I could convince you that it was anonymous. I could probably convince my students it was anonymous, but... and...
Is that something you want, by the way? Because when I speak in class,
there's a lot of different opinions expressed on this. There are cases where it is nice to have it anonymous. In particular, one of the big uses I make of students' work is to talk about misconceptions and incorrect solutions. And so if people know that they're not going to be publicly embarrassed when I display their work and correct it, they seem more inclined to submit. So that's the reason why not having identities displayed. That we actually see the other thing come up very frequently, and that's that students tag their answers so that they can identify when theirs are shown. So one thing I noticed is that in one class there was a student who on all of his submissions did a little Canadian flag. And this was so when I kind of flashed up his solution, he could tell, and maybe his few friends that knew he was Canadian would know it was his, but not publicly identifying himself. So I've seen this type of tagging, and it's a pattern that comes quite frequently. It's interesting to see these various patterns emerge. Here's another type of activity that I found quite useful in lecture, and that's to be able to pose a problem that has people provide some type of answer and almost in a competitive framework. So here I was giving a lecture talking about handwriting recognition, and I wanted to show people how difficult the handwriting recognition problem was. So here's 5 bits of handwriting, and I would like you to recognize each and write the answer and send it in.
What the handwriting answer is worse than...
Well, I see someone beat me too. So there are a set of things that this type of exercise does. That first of all, by asking people to submit answers and commit to them, they're more likely to actually think through it than if I just said, here's 5 examples, what do they mean? That there's also going to be kind of the desire to see how many answers that you're getting right. So this is obviously optimist. Mm-hmm. So programmer's good, optimist's good, attracts, or at rats, I guess. And savory, godmothers. So here we've got survey. Very good. So here's the full text. All programmers are optimists. Perhaps this modern sorcery especially attracts those who believe in happy endings and fairy godmothers. This was a chunk of text I pulled from Brooks's Mythical Man Month. And so I fed this through the Tablet PC recognizer. And here's the set of results that... So programmers came out as propounders. Optimists came out as oppuggans. But here I've got the set of alternates for optimists. So optimists was actually listed second and third as alternates. So it was considered feasible. Let's see, what else did I have? Sorcery was recognized with high confidence, which I found interesting, since that seemed, when I looked at it, to be, even having written it, one of the most difficult to recognize attracts and godmothers. So actually, when I was doing this example, it took a while for me to write poorly enough to get an example which would illustrate what I wanted to, of being kind of at the boundary between where it was getting reasonable things. And so in this type of discussion, I'm able to give an example which draws people in and have people think about a problem, think about the context before I go in more detail and describe it.
Has using the tablet improved your handwriting over the last couple of years?
No, it hasn't. I rarely use the recognizer. In fact, the only time I use the handwriting recognizer is when I'm taking notes in journal in a lecture and I'm getting bored and I want something to play with. So I use the tablet extensively, but I just keep the ink as ink. And so I just rely on my own mental recognizer. So,
question, when you're doing a traditional lecture, you sort of look for different answers, whereas here you get all the answers, and then you go to sort of in real time find the differences.
yes,
Is that an issue?
it's a very, very interesting issue. So with 10 or 15 students, I can generally do fairly well. That I think it's the one challenge to, if this was going to scale to 100 students, that you would want automatic support to do some course classification, bucketing. It's also an attractive domain for that because it doesn't need to be perfect. So it would be feasible for a lot of domains. And yeah, I think that's a very interesting problem of how do you do some automatic analysis to support scaling.
I'm curious, how much participation do you get?
So I've been doing a lot of pilot studies on this, which are artificial because it's artificial because I'm not doing it on a consistent basis. There's a lot of excitement. I spend more time preparing for it. I see very, very high participation, that 90% of the students. I don't know what it would be like, at the 10th week of the term where everyone is saying, oh God, Anderson again. He's blathering on with these exercises.
When I have typically 30 students sitting in front of me, they ask questions and I encourage them to ask questions. I also teach ITV courses where those students usually are remote campus.
Mm-hmm.
And they have an interactive way to communicate. But there's a surge in participation. For every 10 questions I'll get in, say 30 minutes, I'll get like maybe 0.5.
Mm-hmm.
You see
Yeah.
this,
So,
for better or worse, and why?
So, well, on the distance side, because my motivation for doing this was really motivated by distance courses that I've taught. And ironically, I've never used it in a distance course. But that's been the weakest link of having these distance courses and not having a way for remote participation. And so what was the real part of your question?
Well, my experience has been that when I go remote, the participation just decreases.
Yeah.
So, it decreases. Students just don't ask questions.
Yes.
Answer questions as much when they're in remote site. So, without the tool, and with the tool in the classroom, what difference does it make? I mean, am I going to be more interactive with the tool or without the tool?
So my experience in local classes has been I've created a more interactive atmosphere in general. So I'd say there are more questions and spoken episodes when I've used the technology than when I haven't. But I think it's too early to draw a result from that, just because there is kind of there is a halo effect of introducing a new technology. And
so if you think there's an instructor who is really not up to interaction, is it going to make all of a sudden this instructor more interactive?
No, I think the highest order effect is the instructor. And technology can play to different instructors in different ways. And certain technologies fit with certain teaching styles. But I would never advocate everybody using this particular technology, because it's going to work for some people and it's not going to work for other people. So here's an example from a data structures lecture I gave a week ago Monday, just to illustrate the type of thing that I do in class, that I introduced splay trees, and then to talk about how splaying worked, that I first introduced splaying as the process of doing a series of interchanges to bring a node from the bottom of the tree to the top of the tree. So first setting the context for splaying, and then I moved to talk about the basic operations for moving a node 2 levels up a tree. And that there turn out to be 4 different cases to worry about in moving a node 2 levels up a tree. So I picked one of them and worked through and explained why, if you wanted to move the node X up in this case, that you would get a tree that looked like this. So I stepped through one of the cases. And then I gave the students the second case to work through on their own. That you don't need to do this particular example. And so I had the students do this example. And what was fascinating is I've taught data structures for close to 20 years. And I realized when I had formulated this answer, I had no idea what to expect. I just didn't know whether to expect 1 or 2 students would get it right, all students would get it right. And this was just a fascinating realization on my part that with a lot of experience of teaching, I really didn't know whether during lecture I was getting across these fairly mechanical points. And in this particular case, roughly half the students gave a correct answer that looked roughly like this, and roughly half the students gave an incorrect answer. So it's very interesting to get the feedback to see where students stood.
So have you ever given the same question in an exam after they prepared alone and found out whether it's 2/3, 1/3, or half? I'm just curious.
So yes, I've certainly given lots of questions of this level in exams and homework and such. And in exams, people would usually be doing well on this type of fairly simple question.
So it's more like 100%, almost 90%.
Right. So in lecture, it's just interesting at this level I wasn't that sure. So in the lecture I had a series of activities, and I was actually on the whole quite happy with the results of how students were doing in class. So just as a final activity, that one of the very useful ways of using this in the class is to use it to solicit information. And so what problems might arise with this technology in the classroom? So quickly write down and submit an answer. So this has been far, far less of a problem than I had anticipated. That we have a set of 40 HP tablets, and I only know of one hitting the ground. And that was one where I had a cartload of tablets. I turned a corner a little fast, and one of them did a 3-foot drop test onto carpet and survived admirably. And I've got quite comfortable with these tablets. I've taken them to a 4th grade class and passed them around. Comfortable my daughter will use them, and so far losing pens potentially more of a problem, but I still have most of the pens.
Are those different answers? Are those different answers?
So this is a case where dropping tablets was submitted, and then the solution was amended to dropping tablets and losing pens, and maybe there's going to be a third one in the series. So devices in the classroom raises a lot of issues. I'm pretty confident that none of you are surfing the net right now on the tablets that I've provided. That might be one reason. The other reason is I'm using an ad hoc network so that these are not connected to the...
That problem occurs anyway.
Yes.
When people come with laptops.
Right. So,
It's not aggravating.
well, although there certainly are faculty that don't want a computer open in their class. And, of course, there's an incredibly different culture at a place like Microsoft. And, I'm always amused at the faculty summit sitting, Tom maybe shouldn't be hearing this, sitting in the back and seeing, the percentage of people reading email during the talks in the large...
Especially when I'm talking. You say something?
But you also mentioned being in slate mode. You also described about it.
So another thing that I've learned is that these HP tablets are wonderful because I can take off the keyboard and just distribute them as slates. So I've used these tablets with keyboards attached, and the degree of messing around with them is much, much higher. And I've experienced this in a lot of different contexts. And I think seeing them as slates, that you expect that they're only going to be used for the purposes, and there's just less inclination to explore them. Email, web surfing, virus creation, special needs that, clearly that augmenting tablets with keyboards is, that we do want to support keyboard input for this particular application for a lot of reasons, accessibility being one. So often when I give this question, that doodling is the primary concern that comes up. I think people have doodled in paper notebooks as well. Battery life is a real irritation and is actually a serious obstacle for.
How long is the battery?
So these have a kind of two to 3 hour battery, and so right now the model is that I've got a group of tablets which I bring to class, and there's a certain overhead in just making sure that they're all charged. And
so again, at UNC, all our desks have outlets.
So, right. So you're lucky. Yeah. So that's great to be in that situation, and I've got a classroom I use that does have desktop power, and that's fantastic. But retrofitting classrooms for power is.
Look, there's a general problem of the technology breaking down. Anytime you introduce a technology and you come to depend on it, you're at risk.
Yes.
Chalk can break.
But it's interesting our dependence on laptops and data projectors for giving lectures now. That when the bulb is burnt out on these things, it's quite a.
What I'm thinking of is when I was in this room yesterday for a talk, there was a team of guys in blue shirts running around twiddling things and say, "Oh well, this is the wrong deck, or this is the wrong this." Or that. So I suddenly project that to a class of say 60, and we obviously wouldn't get anybody.
Oh, right. So there definitely are startup issues, and I'm very happy at the progress we're making on it, so that I can do a class with 30 tablets and kind of train the students so that they can go through the connection sequence. Long run, hoping that this becomes fairly seamless and fairly easy ways to connect. These types of things, I'm quite confident that in the goodness of time, that we'll get over a lot of these problems. So I find this particular type of brainstorming activity to be an incredibly rich way of using the technology to collect a lot of thoughts on the subject. So being able to simultaneously get answers from people gives everybody a voice and gives a sampling of things, that it can be more efficient since the answers all come in at once. That one thing I like a lot is just having these all written down certainly aids my memory in working through them. Because if someone says something else, I'm definitely going to have forgotten the first one if I answer the second one. So tremendous value to persistence in.
It also seems to be more terse. Because when somebody gives an opinion, they do what I'm doing now. They spend a lot of time and they say a few sentences.
Right. What are the advantages? Terse. That's a good point. That.
But the flip side is that I never I am, because I just pick up the phone.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much easier when you're discussing complex things to be talking rather than writing. So,
Yeah. So just to conclude with a overview of the history and the status, that I spent a sabbatical here 2001, 2002, started work on the system, and took the system back to University of Washington, where I've been continuing to work on this as a long-going and very strong collaboration with the ConferenceXP group. That I'm very happy to finally say that we're releasing Classroom Presenter 2.0, that the release candidate for Classroom Presenter 2.0 is on the web now, and that's what I'm using right now. That currently what we're doing is, now that we're getting version 2 out the door, we're rewriting it from scratch with the goal of having a platform that's much easier to extend, because we've been working on it for a number of years, it's gotten to the point where it's got good functionality, but it's getting harder and harder to build on. And there's, whenever I give talks and talk with people, there are a ton of good ideas of what it would be nice to add. Things like enhancing text input, different mechanisms of archiving. There's a project at MIT of doing automatic analysis of student submissions specifically to address this grouping problem. And so to have a system that's easier to extend, to be able to have a broader community looking at Presenter and developing on it. Okay, so I'd be happy to take any further questions.
So, technologies like Meeting and WebEx have this web presentation model of lectures. And I assume you built all the collaborative features here, right? You use the ConferenceXP just for multicasting.
Right, so we were actually building this as the presentation tool inside of ConferenceXP.
And have you been inspired, or have you even looked at those tools? Because at some abstract level, the same problem is being solved.
Yes, and you always get the question of what are the differences? What are why not just?
I understand this is tablet and all that.
Right. So doing it on the tablet, looking at various real-time aspects of the tablet, looking at classroom scenarios in particular.
Like they have a polling slide.
Yes.
Have you thought of that?
Oh, we've definitely thought of it, and there's a tremendous amount of work in classroom response systems and a lot of literature on that, in the long run, integrating this with a classroom response system would be quite interesting.
Another thing that differentiates it is, this is multicasting data here. In terms of scaling, if you have 100 students hitting a web server over HTML, there's a potential problem.
My question was not to take the same code. My question was to be inspired by the UI features.
So, Richard, where do the students save their work?
So there's a Save As menu, so you can just save the slide deck and various exporting.
Okay, save to your server?
So it's just saved.
Right?
Right, so it's just saved to the local machine, and in our model, students could then just have transfer it to some other device and take it with them. Yes.
What about, your model here was hand out a tablet, use it during class, give the tablet back. What about people who own their own, take it home, do all their work on that unit? Does that change their usage patterns?
So I really want to get to that point of people doing it on people's own devices. That I see as the only viable mechanism for this type of technology. That we can't all go to university relations or HP and say, give us enough tablets to configure our classes. That I think it's only going to work if it's on student devices, and that will have some different dynamics of doing it on personal devices, doing it on shared devices. Yes, that's certainly an argument for doing it this way first.
I was wondering how polite people are with their answers. I mean, it has sort of a flaming effect that can occur.
So not yet, although I've been just doing it in pilot.
Appropriate answer set there, but I must not have sent it in because I thought, there could be a flaming effect.
Mm-hmm. So the only case I've had of an inappropriate answer that I displayed is when I took it to a 4th grade class. and I inadvertently put up Jimmy Stinks, which had been written on a slide.
Given that it's handwriting and not typing, anonymity is lost, and people
Yes.
will be less inclined to flame, knowing that the teacher can, during the exams, compare the handwriting and reading it.
That's true. Well, he also knows
Although,
I think that they believe that there's enough anonymity
Right.
in the software. There is a visual.
I suspect if I used it in a large class, I would occasionally get rude.
Again, then you have collaborative
Yeah.
people in the same. I think you're less likely to flame.
Yes.
When two people are seeing the same.
Yes, and I think another interesting effect of collaboration is I think it could easily be a peer pressure to contribute as well. Yes, so.
high school class might get a different response.
I got to tell you that there was this lecture being given at Duke and UNC, and UNC or Duke had won the game.
Yes.
Probably Duke didn't beat it. And the professor did the lecture, and then somebody put, and it was Duke and UNC, somebody put the Duke sucks as a background on that guy's computer and managed it. So there is that kind of feeling that kind of.
And certainly I do worry about this, the time when we're using this in the class and someone figures out how to inject their slides into the presentation. So we've not looked at kind of hard security in something like ConferenceXP. That
Trump said that he was using 2 people per tablet.
Yes.
Any experience with that?
Absolutely. So I found up to 3 people per tablet works fine. 4 does not work at all. So with 3 people per tablet, you've got a person in the middle, 2 people on the wings that can participate. With 4, you've either got 2 people or 1 or 2 people that are too far away. So this seems to work fine with college kids. With 4th graders, 2 is the max. So we're interested in trying that because that would certainly change the turn taking. Currently, the Tablet PC software does not support multiple pens writing simultaneously. So you can certainly try that out of taking 2 pens and writing at once. And so basically, whichever one's down is going to be registered as being down. So.
It was always the same person, the driver.
So in 4th grade class, we had to have rules about turning back and of enforcing turns. That I haven't looked to see exactly what happens in class. That.
So are people other than you at Washington using this also?
So other faculty have done pilots as well, and one of my students is teaching software engineering and using it regularly. That faculty have done pilots in digital design, and some faculty at other universities. Joe Tront is doing experiments. Beth Simons is using.
So following up on that, is it increasing usage, or is it just nobody gets interested in it?
So it's in the early days. It was just kind of around December that things were stable enough for us to do it in a wireless classroom.
But there's also a network effect. I'm hearing more
Yeah.
and more kind of second-hand by people who
There's been quite an increase in people just using it as a presentation application of a way to write on slides. And that's often the introduction for people, just how do you make PowerPoint more interactive and support various things such as being able to have extra writing space and so forth.
So we've got a lot more people with laptops than tablets.
Yes.
What happens to the mixed classroom?
So I don't know yet that I could.
You can certainly put out the slide.
Yes, and with laptops, some exercises such as the curve drawing exercise at the start, you could do that with a mouse adequately. It's hard to write with a mouse. In the future, we'll support keyboard input too. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, no.
I hope you didn't mind.
Oh, no. No, it's good.
I was enjoying
Yeah.
it. So what's going on here? This is not PowerPoint, right?
No, so I started with PowerPoint, exported as image, and then the application is
So
just
the
working.
animations are lost then?
Animations are lost, yes.
That's a really big issue.
For some people, yes. Yes.
For those people who spend hours and
Yeah.
hours building.
Which I do. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
what you do with this doodling is what I do with animation.
Right.
Right. Okay. This is OneNote then, right? No.
Classroom presenter.
Okay.
Yes.
So why couldn't you just have gotten events from press PowerPoint directly?
Why couldn't I have used